Okay, international education, you see, India is a very complex country, and you can't say very clearly this is India. Similarly, you can't point a finger and say this is Indian education. Does PISA test describe its quality? Do our best schools describe the quality? Just like India is a complex country, our education system also is very complex, and it can't be painted with a single brush or described in one line. So in engineering, for example, we have the IITs, people rubbing shoulders with the best in the world, to colleges which are fairly good, to ones which are not so good, to ones which even the owners don't know whether they exist or not. It's that bad. Okay, we have schools, the best of international schools, the outstanding Kendriya Vidyalayas, Navodaya Vidyalayas. If you go to Gujarat, where I've opened a couple of schools, you know, some parents prefer the state board. And there are some schools which even the staff doesn't know whether they exist or where they exist. So it is a spectrum, it's a continuation of things. And there's a solution for every spectrum which has to be worked out. At the primary education level in the government sector, the right to education, the spread of education, the availability of teachers, their training, buildings is important. In secondary education, in the Rashtriya Madhyamik Shiksha Abhiyan, what's important is the number of secondary schools go up, and the middle schools get upgraded to secondary schools. In the higher education sector, we just need to open more universities and colleges, maybe 500 universities more, or 1,500 more, and about 30,000 colleges more. So everything is a different segment, and everything has its own challenges, and there can't be a single description of it all. Every segment requires a typical solution. The international schools are another segment, and therefore they require, a separate treatment, because they are being driven by what I call the demand for globalization. There is a main driver behind the growth of international schools in India. The Indian economy is globalizing. There are multinationals coming to India, employing Indians. There's a great outsourcing boom, where today a youngster just out of college talks to an American or a Britisher or a European and tells him about what he can do with his credit card. The Indians going to work abroad, a young software engineer who is passed out of Warangal from engineering college, in 2 years finds himself or herself in Amsterdam, doesn't know what to do, how to behave abroad, what's the etiquette around there. Indians are acquiring companies abroad. So India is globally integrating. And therefore it requires an entrepreneurial workforce, a managerial workforce, which is capable of this global assimilation. And that is the main driver today behind the growth of international schools in India, and that's why they are mushrooming. However, like any other fad, they can't grow too fast. If you're talking of starting an international school, or what you call a global school in the true sense of the word, then you have to cater to some things to make it world class. I mean, there are all those affiliations with boards, CBSC, IGCSC, ICSC, IB, those affiliations are there. But typically a good international school should have a good global exchange program. The students of that school and teachers should be able to exchange views, information, education freely with other such schools all over the world. They need to bring in global best practices in teaching, where the learning is not by rote. And I think what is very important in these schools is the use of technology. Technology, whereas comes through the use of just teaching IT, down to the use of technology in smart rooms, down to special labs like the maths lab, the social science lab, the geography lab, home science lab, composite lab. In all these labs, you require to put in a lot of technology into these schools, which is important. And believe me, when parents go for an international school, one of the most important things they look at is infrastructure. They expect a big school with lots of infrastructure. They expect technology. They expect to see methods of learning which are not followed in normal schools. And they expect to see a very, very vigorous global exchange program, backed by very good results in international boards. These are characteristics. So like I said, every segment, whether it's the primary education segment, the government sector, the higher education sector, or whether it's the international schooling sector, each had its own requirement. India is a complex education spectrum. And these are some of the demands which are required of international schooling in India. My last slide is basically to look at, how do you open international schools in India? What are the challenges being faced? What are the opportunities? Today, primarily the demand for international schools is coming up in metros and tier 1 towns. The metros have it in plenty. The tier 1 towns are beginning to show this kind of requirement. And it will spread downwards. It will spread. Very, very funnily, unlike other schools, international schools seem not to be driven by location constraint. You don't have to have a school in a prime location. It can be far away from town. An example is Pathways or the Kellogg School I've seen in Ahmedabad. Location is not the issue. Because what is important is the schools typically tend to have a large size, which you don't get in the middle of the city. You get outside the city. So location is not the issue, but the infrastructure investment in the schools is going to be of a higher order as opposed to other schools to other boards. Another issue is that you're going to cater, when you open an international school, you will cater to a very narrow segment. Although demand is growing, but even today, at the price level at which they operate, the kind of people who want this kind of schooling, you're catering to a very, very narrow segment, which is growing. It's growing with time. But that is going to be, so if more schools open, they will go after the same segment. Because the kind of teaching methods used here are very, very different in nature, the teacher availability will be a major issue. And as you spread from metro to tier 1 to tier 2, this will become a bigger constraint. So teacher availability is issue. More or less, many of these schools have a very strong residential component. Hence the land size also is large. So these are some of the special characteristics for these schools, the kind of opportunities coming up, the kind of challenges coming up. But the kind of growth we are seeing in the rate of these schools, the way they are growing, it clearly is a segment of great future significance, and I think will grow with time in India to come. Thank you very much.